I was halfway through pouring myself a second cup of coffee when I heard the kind of laughter that only means one thing: trouble I didn't order. I stepped toward the kitchen window expecting maybe kids biking by, but no. There in my backyard stood HOA Karen, sunglasses on, drink in hand, using one of my garden rakes to pop open my side gate like she'd been rehearsing it. Behind her, 4 of her HOA besties, all carrying towels, wine coolers, floaties, and the energy of women who had decided my private pool was the new neighborhood spa. Before I could even blink, they were spreading out across my patio, turning on music, and jumping into the pool while Karen declared loudly, "Ladies, welcome to our new community oasis." That was the moment I realized something important. I never bought a house with a pool. Apparently, I bought the HOA Resort and Day Spa and forgot to check in for my shift as lifeguard. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and your local time, and if you enjoy HOA chaos, don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I stepped out onto the porch still holding my coffee, though at that point, it was more of an emotional support beverage than anything else. The scene unfolding in my backyard looked like someone had merged a PTA meeting with a Vegas pool party and forgotten to inform the homeowner, me. Karen's friends were already kicking off their sandals, tossing bags onto my patio furniture, and moving around like they were checking in for their spa appointments. Meanwhile, Karen herself lounged back, as if she'd just claimed discovery rights over my property. "Excuse me," I said, forcing out the politest tone I could manage for a man watching strangers cannonball into his pool. "What exactly are you all doing here?" Karen didn't even look embarrassed. She tilted her sunglasses down the way someone dramatic does in a movie when they're about to deliver a villain monologue. "Relax," she said calmly. "We're just cooling off. The community pool is disgusting today. And your tile work? Beautiful. Seriously, everyone talks about it." "That's nice," I replied, "but this isn't a community pool." She smiled at me, like I was the one misunderstanding something. "Exactly. That's why we're here. The HOA encourages neighborly sharing of amenities. It's in the spirit of unity." She lifted her drink. "Cheers to unity." One of her friends, a woman wearing a sun hat big enough to shield a minivan, chimed in. "Yeah, don't be one of those selfish types. We're all part of the same neighborhood." I blinked at them. "I never invited any of you." "You don't have to invite us," Karen answered matter-of-factly, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler. "The community invites us." "What community?" I asked. She pointed vaguely at the air. "You know, the community." At that very moment, one of her friends turned up the Bluetooth speaker they had unpacked. My patio was starting to look like the front row of a suburban Coachella, and another one popped open a bottle of rosé like we were celebrating the launch of a cruise line. They were making themselves very comfortable on furniture I had paid for. Under a pergola, I built myself next to a grill that only I had the right to splash water on. "Okay," I said, rubbing my forehead, "we need to talk about this." "This is my private property. That's why it's so peaceful," Karen replied, laying back. "The community pool gets crowded. This is much nicer for everyone. Everyone except the guy who owned the property, me." I tried reason. "Karen, you can't just walk into someone's yard." "I didn't walk," she corrected. I entered calmly and respectfully. "You used my rake to unlatch the gate." "A tool merely assisted the process," she said, waving it off like I was being overly dramatic. I looked at the rake leaning against the fence. It still felt warm with violation. "And what exactly makes you think you're allowed to be here?" I asked. Karen sighed deeply, the sigh of someone tired of explaining the same thing to someone who just doesn't get it. "Because the HOA bylaws encourage shared amenities. I don't belong to the HOA." This time she actually paused. "You don't know. My property predates the HOA. It's not part of it." Karen stared at me as though I had just confessed to being a tax evader. "Well, that's silly. Everyone is part of the HOA. I'm not," I insisted. "You should be," she said, as if that settled it. "One of her friends splashed water my direction accidentally," she claimed, while lowering herself onto a floaty shaped like a flamingo. Another adjusted herself on my patio chair, dripping pool water on the cushions, then took a selfie with the caption number, "Pool Day with My Girls." I could see from the angle that I was somewhere blurry in the background, looking like a furious cardboard cutout. As I tried to keep my breathing even, I asked, "Where is your husband during all of this?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, he knows not to interfere with Girls' Day. That makes one of us." Her friends giggled like they were teenagers at a slumber party, instead of grown women trespassing on private property. Then came the comment that officially sparked the wildfire inside me. "You should be flattered," one of them said. "Your pool is the nicest in the neighborhood. Everyone is jealous." "You're welcome," another added. They were acting like I should roll out a red carpet and thank them for blessing my property with their presence. I couldn't take any more of this surreal HOA fever dream. I pulled out my phone and called Roger, the HOA president, mainly because I wanted to hear him say out loud that I was not in fact losing my mind. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey neighbor, everything okay, Roger?" I said. "I need to clarify something. Is there any possible universe in which my pool is considered a community amenity?" There was a pause. "Well, technically, the HOA encourages sharing, Roger. I am not part of your HOA." Another pause. This one longer. "Right. That's true. Your board has tried to claim my property twice before. You remember." "Oh yes," he muttered. "That was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Well, Karen is in my pool right now, with 4 of her friends, claiming the HOA says they can use it." Roger exhaled softly. "Well, she does have children. This isn't about kids. There are middle-aged ladies drinking wine in my pool. That's new," he admitted. "Roger, what are you going to do about it?" Another long diplomatic silence. "Listen, maybe you could just let them finish their swim today. Then we can discuss it at the next HOA meeting." "Roger," I said slowly, "I don't attend HOA meetings. Because I'm not in the HOA." "Yes, that part is tricky." "Not tricky," I corrected, "just reality." Still, Roger said it would be a shame to escalate things. I hung up before my blood pressure became a crime scene. Karen looked at me over her sunglasses with a smug smile, as if she could sense the utter uselessness of the HOA's response. "Poor Roger," she said. "He hates conflict." "I don't," I replied. She laughed. "Oh, you're so dramatic. Just relax. It's only a pool. It's only a pool that belongs to me." "Exactly," she said. "And sharing is caring." I had 2 choices: cause a scene that would go viral in seconds, or walk away before I said something that would turn my lawn into a battlefield. So, I quietly stepped back, returned inside, and shut the door. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a one-time annoyance. This was going to be a war of boundaries. And if they were going to treat my home like a resort, then I was going to have to start acting like the world's most sarcastic security guard. So I did what any reasonable, irritated, caffeine-deprived homeowner would do. I locked the gate. I ordered new cameras, and then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 24 hours later, the unmistakable sound of determined footsteps came marching down my driveway, the kind of stomping only HOA women make when they believe they are victims of an injustice so grand it must be solved. Immediately, I stepped onto the porch, folding my arms, already knowing who it was before she even came into view. Karen stood there, arms crossed so tightly her acrylic nails dug into her cardigan sleeves. Behind her were 2 of the women from yesterday's backyard invasion followers, loyal but confused, like backup dancers who missed rehearsal. "You locked the gate," Karen announced, as if revealing a plot twist in a murder mystery. "Yes," I said. "You installed cameras." "Correct." "You put up a sign that makes it sound like we're criminals. When you break in," I replied, "you are criminals." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a goldfish trying to form a rebuttal. One of her friends gasped dramatically, clutching her chest, like I'd shot her emotional support water bottle. Karen pointed an accusatory finger at me. "You are creating hostility in this neighborhood." "I'm creating boundaries," I corrected. "Boundaries," she repeated with disgust, as if the word tasted like expired yogurt. "The whole neighborhood thinks you're selfish." "Great," I said. "Let them form a line. I'll buy more locks." Her face twitched. I could tell she wanted to unleash a screaming tirade, but was trying to appear classy. Unfortunately for her, classy wasn't a setting she was equipped with. She stepped closer. "You need to open the gate, right now." "The HOA? I'm not part of your HOA," I interrupted. "And the HOA has no authority over my property. That's not how community works. That's exactly how private land works." She sputtered visibly, short-circuiting, then snapped. "You'll be hearing from us." "Great," I said. "Tell Roger I said hi." She spun around dramatically, well, as dramatically as someone wearing flip-flops can spin, and stormed off with her backup dancers flapping behind her. When she reached the sidewalk, she turned back like she suddenly remembered she had one last powerful line to deliver. "And, by the way, your sign is tacky. It matches the personality of the people trying to trespass." Her jaw dropped. She clearly didn't expect me to clap back. That afternoon, while I sat on the porch sipping iced tea, I heard the unmistakable sound of children's whispering. I leaned forward just in time to see Karen's 2 kids dragging a plastic stool from their porch like tiny burglars preparing for a heist. They positioned it under the fence, one boosting the other, as they attempted to vault over. One of them shouted, "Mom says we're allowed," I called out. "Tell your mom to come say that to my face." They froze like squirrels caught stealing bread, then bolted back down the sidewalk, the stool bouncing behind them. 15 minutes later, right on schedule, Karen stormed back, hair frizzed, cheeks red, holding the stool like it was Exhibit A in a court case. She imagined herself winning. "You scared my children. They scared themselves trying to break into my yard. You are threatening them with surveillance," she snapped, gesturing dramatically toward my cameras. "You threaten my property with your children?" Her voice rose to a high pitch. "You are escalating this." I stood up. "You turned my backyard into a water park without permission. You used a rake to break in. You brought friends. You drank wine in my pool. You filmed yourselves here without consent. And now you're sending your children to climb my fence." I'm simply responding. She glared at me like a cartoon villain on the verge of monologuing. "I'm telling the HOA that you're creating an unsafe environment. I'll tell the sheriff that you're teaching your kids to trespass." Her entire body clenched like she had swallowed a lemon whole. Then she released a frustrated growl, a genuine feral growl, and stomped off again, mumbling about toxic neighbors and community spirit. That night I made upgrades. Real upgrades. I didn't just lock the gate, I reinforced it. A thick steel latch, new bolts, and a keypad code only I knew. Then I added motion-activated lights bright enough to illuminate a small airport runway. And, for good measure, I installed a Bluetooth speaker hidden near the fence, programmed to play a deep, menacing bark whenever motion was detected. Petty, yes. Necessary, absolutely. Around midnight, the first test run happened. The sensor tripped. The speaker barked like a German shepherd on Red Bull. A shriek echoed through the alley. Then fast footsteps. Then silence. I slept like a baby. But the next morning, however, was a new chapter. When I stepped outside, I found a collection of floating toys tossed over the fence, plastic rings, a small, inflatable unicorn, and a pair of neon pink goggles. My yard looked like a yard sale hosted by a deranged mermaid. I sighed, gathered everything into a plastic bin, walked straight to Karen's porch, dropped it at her doorstep, rang the bell, and walked away without a word. The cameras caught everything that followed. Karen opened the door, saw the bin, looked around like she expected an audience, and then kicked the bin hard enough to send a rubber duck flying into her flower bed. I made popcorn and watched the replay twice, but if I thought that was the peak of Karen's pettiness, I was deeply mistaken. Later that afternoon, my dog, a gentle golden retriever who looks like a loaf of bread with legs, started barking softly. 5 minutes later, animal control showed up. Apparently, Karen had reported my dog as aggressive and territorial. The officer took one look at my dog, who immediately rolled over to have his belly rubbed, and apologized for the inconvenience. Before leaving, he whispered, "We get a lot of calls from this street. Wonderful." An hour later, I found a bright pink slip tucked under my windshield wiper. It looked like a parking citation at first, but when I picked it up, I realized it was something far worse. A fake HOA violation notice, written in glitter, gel pen, accusing me of failure to share community water feature. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. I snapped a picture, posted it to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Anyone else getting forged HOA fines today, or is it just me?" The comments section exploded. People who'd had their own run-ins with Karen began chiming in. She forged a noise complaint on me once. She accused my kid of vandalizing her mailbox. He's 2. She told me my lawn gnome was non-compliant decor. Turns out I wasn't her first target. I was simply her favorite. I leaned back in my porch chair and took a long sip of iced tea, savoring the moment. It was comforting to know I wasn't imagining things. This was a pattern, and Karen was a one-woman crusade of chaos. But knowing it wasn't enough, I wasn't going to let my home become her seasonal retreat. I needed to take back my peace permanently. So I opened my tool shed, pulled out my drill, my measuring tape, and more determination than caffeine could provide. If Karen wanted a battle over the pool, I'd give her one, but not the way she expected. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to stand at the fence trading insults. No, I was going to redesign the entire pool entrance. A structure so secure, so unbreakable, so comically over-engineered, that even the HOA queen of entitlement herself couldn't breach it. And I'd do it while watching from the porch, just to make sure she saw every minute of her defeat. The next morning felt different, not quieter, not calmer, but charged like the air just before a thunderstorm, when you can practically feel the static crawling across your skin. Karen had crossed a line, but she thought I was still playing defense. She had no idea that I'd already shifted into full construction mode pettiness. And if there's one thing a middle-aged man with tools and free time is unbeatable at, it's building something out of pure spite. I walked the perimeter of my pool fence like a general surveying a battlefield. The wooden gate creaked slightly when I touched it, old, worn, and far too gentle for the war ahead. I grabbed a notepad and started jotting down measurements. Panels, posts, reinforced brackets. I wanted something strong enough to withstand hurricanes, HOA members, and invasive gossip. By noon, I was in the hardware store, loading my truck with lumber steel posts, quick-set, concrete motion sensor floodlights, a keypad lock system, and a handful of things I didn't even know I needed, but they looked like something a man defending his sanity should definitely own. The cashier raised an eyebrow at the mountain of equipment. "Building a bunker?" he asked. I smiled. Something like that. When I got home, the sun was high and unforgiving. I dragged everything into the backyard, cracked open a cold drink, and stared at my old fence like it had personally wronged me. Then I grabbed my post-hole digger and started digging. Every clump of dirt I lifted felt therapeutic, like each scoop was erasing a Karen-induced migraine. Sweat dripped down my forehead, dirt clung to my clothes, and my arms ached within half an hour, but I kept going. I wasn't just building a fence. I was building a message. Halfway through digging the first set of footers, I felt eyes on me. I straightened up and turned my head just enough to see shadows moving along the sidewalk. There they were, Karen and her troop of HOA groupies, walking slowly, pushing strollers without children, pretending to admire the neighborhood landscaping like undercover agents who failed the stealth portion of their training. They slowed down in front of my house. One of the women cupped her hand to her forehead and whispered loudly. "What is he doing?" Karen answered in that fake sweet voice she used when trying to appear reasonable. "Looks like he's trying to make a point." I ignored them, dug deeper, and installed the first steel post. The sound of my drill piercing metal echoed through the cul-de-sac. Every shrill whine of the power tool felt like a victory horn. One of the HOA ladies called out, "You know this looks aggressive?" I didn't even look up. "Good," I said. "It's not meant to be subtle." They huffed collectively, an entire choir of offended suburban indignation, and walked off. By the time the sun began to set, I had 2 steel posts locked in concrete and a third halfway done. My shirt was drenched. My back felt like it had aged 10 years, but I stood there with a sense of accomplishment no HOA vote could ever take away from me. The next morning, I kept going. I attached reinforced wooden panels, stained them, sealed them, and installed horizontal metal struts for extra rigidity. If Karen wanted to call it a prison fence, I was ready to make it the most handsome prison fence she'd ever seen. Around lunch, my neighbor Pam walked over the sweet older woman who'd watched this drama unfold from her kitchen window like a live soap opera. She brought lemonade, which already put her at the top of my favorite neighbor list. "You building a fortress?" she asked, handing me a cold cup. "Something like that." "Well," she said, patting my arm, "you've earned it." Then she looked around, leaned closer, and whispered, "Just so you know, Karen's been telling people you're putting up the fence because you hate women." I nearly choked on my lemonade. "Women?" Pam nodded. "All women, apparently." "Pam, I'm not building a fence to keep out women. I'm building a fence to keep out Karen." She laughed so hard she snorted. When she walked away, I felt refreshed and ready to continue constructing what I affectionately named in my head the Great Wall of No Karen. By mid-afternoon, sweat ran down my spine, staining the back of my shirt. Sawdust stuck to my arms, and my hands were raw. But I'd made serious progress. The gate frame was up. The panels were aligned. My drill battery was on its 3rd charge. Then came the second parade. I heard footsteps, multiple sets, and looked up to see Karen, 2 of her loyal friends, and even Roger from the HOA, strolling toward my property like a pack of executives coming to inspect a construction site they didn't approve of. Roger waved weakly. "Hey neighbor, nice day to build, isn't it?" I wiped my forehead. "Perfect day." Karen crossed her arms, surveying the fence with disdain. "This is excessive." "So is trespassing," I replied. She scoffed. "You're ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood. There are rules about uniform fencing. There are rules for HOA members," I reminded her, "which I am not." Roger stepped in, clearly trying to avoid a civil war. "We just want to make sure everything stays friendly." I gestured broadly. Friendly ended when someone used my gardening tools to break into my yard. Karen's friends gasped like synchronized swimmers. Karen pressed a hand dramatically to her chest. "You're twisting the story." "I have cameras," I said. Roger visibly winced. "Yes, we remember. You emailed the files." Karen snapped. "You didn't tell me that." Roger avoided her gaze. "I told you to stop escalating." Karen flared. "This is not escalation. This is my right as a homeowner to request access to community spaces. This isn't a community space, I said. It's my backyard. It could be, she muttered. It never will be. The argument might have gone on longer, but then my motion sensor beeped. Someone had approached the back corner of my fence. We all turned. On reflex, I tapped my phone screen to view the camera feed. It was one of Karen's kids with a stick poking around the fence line. Karen didn't even look embarrassed. Oh, for goodness sake, they're just curious. They're casing my perimeter like tiny thieves. Karen's voice sharpened. Don't talk about my children like that. I looked her straight in the eyes. Then, stop making them the front line of your bad decisions. Her face flushed. She spun around and stormed off, dragging her confused entourage with her. I returned to work fueled by righteous fury and leftover adrenaline. An hour later, I installed the keypad lock, sleek, sturdy, bright silver. I mounted the floodlights and adjusted their angles so they'd illuminate every inch of the gate. I added the final steel crossbar. Then for the pièce de résistance, I mounted the small brass mailbox slot on the exterior post with a tiny engraved plaque underneath. For HOA complaints, insert here. It was petty, it was beautiful, it was perfect. By dusk, the structure stood fully assembled, a towering, clean-lined fortress of privacy, legality, and suburban defiance. The wood gleamed in the golden light. The steel posts looked immovable. The lock clicked with satisfying authority. I stepped back and admired my masterpiece. I wasn't just proud, I was victorious. That night, around 10 p.m., as I sat on the porch with a cold drink, my camera tripped again. I tapped the feed. Karen was out there, alone, flashlight in hand, walking slowly around the fence like a jaguar stalking prey. She circled twice, examined the posts, touched the locks, tried lifting the bottom of one panel, then stood right in front of the camera and lifted her phone, filming my fence like she was compiling evidence for a lawsuit she hadn't invented. Yet, she paced for 12 full minutes. 12. It was like watching an owl stuck in a loop. Then she left. But not before muttering, "You won't keep us out forever." I exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. She was planning something. And for the first time since this ridiculous war began, I actually felt a thrill. She wanted a fight. I was finally ready. It didn't take long for Karen's next move to arrive, and when it did, it came wrapped in the kind of smug, self-righteous energy only someone who believes rules exist solely to inconvenience other people could radiate. I first noticed something was off when I stepped outside the next morning and found a piece of paper tucked under my doormat. At first glance, it looked official, white cardstock typed font, an attempt at formality. But the moment I picked it up, I recognized the familiar scent of cheap perfume and delusion. It was another fake HOA notice, but this one wasn't handwritten in glitter gel pen. No, this one was more elaborate, more dramatic, like Karen had spent an entire evening drafting it with her committee. It read, "Mandatory community, amenity review pool usage, vote pending." I rubbed my temples. You've got to be kidding me. Later that day, I walked down to my mailbox and found an even bigger surprise. A manila envelope stuffed to the brim, sealed with an official-looking HOA sticker. Inside were photocopied petitions, each with a few signatures scribbled on them and a cover sheet titled, "Unity Through Shared Resources Initiative." At the top, in handwritten cursive, was Karen's name, looped dramatic and unmistakably hers. I flipped through the pages. 13 signatures. 13 people who either hated confrontation, owed Karen favors, or were tricked into signing something they didn't read. And next to each signature was a box labeled, "Yes, bring our neighborhood together." No NO box. No option for dissent, because of course not. The kicker was a paragraph describing the voluntary annexation of neighboring properties into the HOA. The word voluntary was in quotation marks, as if mocking the concept of consent. I stared at the papers, baffled by the creativity of Karen's entitlement. She didn't just want access to my pool anymore. She wanted jurisdiction over my backyard, my house, and apparently my future grandchildren. A knock came at the door. I opened it to find Roger, HOA president and full-time disaster avoider, standing on my porch looking like a man who'd aged a decade in a week. He held another envelope in both hands like it was radioactive. "Hey," he said, voice unsure. "Just delivering some documentation." "You mean Karen's fan fiction?" He sighed, defeated. "She's pushing hard. Claims she found an old clause in the original HOA charter about expanding boundaries. She wants a neighborhood vote." "Roger," I said, carefully, "do you believe this clause actually exists?" He swallowed. "I believe Karen believes it exists." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. I cross my arms. We both know my parcel predates the HOA. It is legally outside your jurisdiction. We do know that he agreed quickly. But Karen thinks rules are suggestions, and property lines are decorative. He nodded, eyes darting toward her house, as if she might be watching us through binoculars, and honestly, given her track record, she probably was. He handed me the envelope. I'm required to give you this. Consider it a formality. I didn't take it immediately. What happens if Karen succeeds in getting enough signatures? Roger sighed loudly. A meeting would be held, a vote would be held, but legally none of it would matter unless you signed off. So this is just a social pressure stunt, he nodded. A big one. I finally took the envelope and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the absurdity in my hands. 13 signatures and a dream. Karen was trying to annex my pool, like it was a lost territory in the HOA empire she had appointed herself queen of. Well, if she wanted to play politics, I'd give her a civics lesson. I spent the next few hours making phone calls. First to the county zoning office, then to the assessor's office, then for good measure to a lawyer I'd kept on retainer ever since Karen first tried to accuse me of violating a fictional noise ordinance. Every official I spoke to responded the same way. No, they can't do that. No. HOA authority is limited to its own parcels. No. They can't forcibly absorb your land. No. Even if every neighbor votes yes, you still have to consent. One woman at zoning even laughed and asked, "Is this one of those crazy HOA stories?" My sister dealt with something similar. She ended up building a moat. A moat sounds reasonable, I said. Armed with confirmation, I drafted my counterattack. I printed out the official county parcel map highlighted boldly in red. Then I laminated it. Then I added a metal sign underneath, "This property is not subject to HOA governance. Trespassers will be prosecuted." But I wasn't done. I then created 60 flyers, one for every home in the neighborhood. Each flyer had the map of the HOA boundary, my lot clearly marked outside it, and a short message. Attempts to annex this property into HOA authority without owner consent constitute harassment and will be met with legal action. Short, clear, and deliciously devoid of glitter. I walked door to door delivering them. Some neighbors raised eyebrows. Some apologized for signing Karen's petition without realizing what it was. One woman confessed that Karen told her my pool was being rented to tourists overnight. Tourists, I repeated. There's not even a guest room. She said they sleep on the patio furniture, the woman replied, embarrassed. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. Ma'am, I don't even let myself nap on the patio furniture. When I got home, I found Karen standing at the edge of my driveway. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed, lip trembling in righteous fury. She wasn't alone either. 2 of her friends flanked her like a pair of angry bookends. "You're causing division," she said without greeting. "You're trespassing again," I replied. She gestured wildly at the flyers some neighbors were already holding. "You went door to door, yes. Spreading lies about me. Everything on that flyer is verifiable. That's not the point," she snapped. "You're making me look bad," I held her gaze. "Karen, you're making you look bad." Her jaw clenched. "This isn't over. If it involves my pool, I said it is very much over." She stormed off so fast, her sandals slapped the pavement like applause. That night, around 8:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. It was Karen. She had written a long, rambling, punctuation-challenged rant titled, "Discrimination in Our Neighborhood When Neighbors Exclude." She accused me of weaponizing municipal documents, spreading misinformation, bullying women, and locking joy behind iron bars. The comment section split instantly. Some people clutched their pearls, others roasted her into oblivion. A few brought popcorn emojis. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Screenshots of her trespassing began appearing under her own post. Someone uploaded a clip of her using my rake on the gate. Someone else shared her fake HOA fines. Someone posted, "Girl, he's not the problem. Your entitlement is the problem." The thread had reached over 200 comments by midnight. Karen was losing control. She tried one last move to regain it. 2 days later, an email went out to the entire neighborhood community demonstration Free the Pool. I stared at the subject line, whispering, "There's no way this is real." It was real. She announced a peaceful lawn gathering in front of my property to protest exclusive water usage and the lack of community sharing spirit. She even promised lemonade. And sure enough, that weekend around noon, a small crowd gathered, about 8 people wearing sunglasses and frowns, sitting in folding chairs on my lawn, like they were tailgating a football game no one wanted to attend. A cardboard sign stuck in the grass read, "Free the pool." A woman I'd never met passed around plastic cups of lemonade. Karen stood in the center with a clipboard shouting about unity. I called the sheriff's office and said I'd like to report a trespassing picnic. When the deputies arrived, it took them exactly 15 minutes to clear everyone off my property. No citations, just warnings. But the sight of uniformed officers ushering HOA groupies away from my driveway was a moment I will cherish until the day I die. Karen shrieked something about fascism in suburbia as she packed up her clipboard. I waved politely from the porch. She glared back. The war wasn't over, but her army was thinning, and I was just getting started. Karen's Free the Pool protest should have been her grand moment, the dramatic uprising she imagined would unite the neighborhood under her sparkling banner of entitlement. Instead, it lasted 14.5 minutes, ended with 2 deputies escorting disgruntled lawn chair warriors off my grass, and concluded with Karen shouting, "You haven't heard the last of this," while her entourage folded their chairs, in shame. I had, however, heard the last of their lemonade. They left the jug behind. It was terrible. After the deputies left, I sat on the porch with my dog beside me, sipping my own drink while replaying the body cam footage, worthy memory of Karen being told quite firmly to get off my lawn. It should have been the end. A reasonable person would have retreated. A normal neighbor would have reflected. A functioning adult would have accepted the consequences. But not Karen. Karen didn't see reality. She saw opportunity. 2 mornings later, my mailbox overflowed with neon pink pamphlets titled, "Is Your Neighbor a Threat?" The front had a cartoon of a crying child standing behind a locked fence, hands pressed to the bars. Dramatic, manipulative, badly drawn. Inside was a list of grievances. Some neighbors weaponize fences. Some neighbors refuse to share community water for safety education. Some neighbors create divisive environments. Some neighbors watch women with cameras. I stopped reading at "Watch Women with Cameras" because that phrase alone could have landed her a cameo on a courtroom TV show. I tossed the pamphlet onto my counter and made myself a second cup of coffee, marveling at the sheer athleticism of Karen's mental gymnastics. She wasn't just bending reality, she was contorting it like a Cirque du Soleil performer. My phone buzzed. A neighbor had posted a picture of the pamphlet in the Facebook group with the caption, "Who drew this horror movie?" The comments were savage. Are the tears waterproof? Did Karen hire a 5-year-old to illustrate this? Plot twist: neighbor refuses to share water because it's HIS property. One person even posted a meme of someone locking a gate with the caption, "Me protecting my private property from delusional HOA members." Karen didn't respond. The silence was loud. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone is planning something foolish but big, and she didn't disappoint. That Thursday morning, while I was trimming the hedges along the side of my house, I noticed something odd on my back fence. A streak of bright color. Red. I walked closer. Spray paint. Big letters, messy dripping, splashed across the back panels. Pool. Prison. My jaw locked. I immediately checked my cameras. The night vision footage popped up, and there it was, Karen's car parked in the alley, headlights off. Her older kid holding the spray can. Karen standing lookout, whispering instructions. At one point, she stepped into frame, snapped a photo of her child posing in front of the vandalism, and then both of them scampered back into the car. They even took a selfie. I watched the footage 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because the absurdity was so profound it deserved multiple viewings. I downloaded the clip, labeled it Exhibit A, Parenting Choices, and called the sheriff. They took it seriously. Criminal mischief, vandalism, trespassing, finally, consequences. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one calling law enforcement. She was the subject of the report. I half expected her to storm over and accuse me of defamation, illegal surveillance, or creating an environment hostile to spray paint. But instead, something very different happened. She knocked on my door the next morning, holding a tray of muffins. I blinked at her. "What's this?" She smiled, a tight, shaky smile, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Peace offering, I repeated slowly. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot," she said. "Things got a little passionate. But we're neighbors. We can move past this." I stared at her for a long moment. Are these muffins supposed to make me forget the vandalism, or the fake HOA fines, or the protest on my lawn? Her smile flickered. "Humor doesn't solve everything. Neither does graffiti," I said. She inhaled sharply. "Look, the footage doesn't show anything conclusive. It shows your entire license plate. That doesn't mean it was us. It shows your child holding the spray can. That could be any spray can. It shows you taking a selfie in front of the word pool prison." Karen's eyes darted, panic flickering behind them. You can't prove my intentions. My intention, I said, is to stop you before you dig this hole any deeper. She stiffened. Are you threatening me? No, I said calmly. I'm giving you neighborly advice. Her hands tightened around the muffin tray. Her lip trembled. For a second I thought she might apologize, an actual apology, not the mutually assured delusion kind, but instead she thrust the tray forward and snapped. Take the muffins or I'll report you for harassment. Reporting me for rejecting baked goods, I asked. That's a new one. She dropped the muffin tray at my feet, spun around and stomped off. The plastic container bounced twice on the concrete. Blueberry muffins scattered like edible shrapnel. Enjoy your lonely pool, you bitter man, she shouted over her shoulder. I will, I said, from the porch with peace and without your friends peeing in it. Her gasp echoed like a dying parrot. She disappeared into her house. For a moment I considered sweeping up the muffins. Then I decided they could wait. I sat on my porch steps exhaling. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated even, but instead something unsettling tugged at me. Karen was unraveling. She'd transitioned from entitled to desperate, from bold to sloppy, from loud to dangerous. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was escalating, and that meant something bigger was coming. That night I lay awake, thinking about how to end this war without escalating it into something catastrophic. Then it hit me a solution so absurd, so theatrical, so perfectly Karen-proof, that it would shut down every future attempt before she even lifted a glitter gel pen. A party. Not just any party. A neighborhood-wide pool party with exclusive invitations. A chance to set the record straight. A chance to reveal the truth. A chance to let Karen dig her own grave publicly. But it needed weight. Authority. Witnesses. Someone who could shut down the nonsense for good. So the next morning, I picked up the phone and called my cousin Dean, a retired police chief who now worked part-time with the county commissioner's office. He listened to everything and laughed so hard he wheezed. You want to host a community pool event as a strategic defensive maneuver? Yes. You want me there in an official capacity? Absolutely. He paused. Then I'll bring ribs. We chose the following Saturday. I made invitations, actual printed invitations with a tasteful blue border, and the words poolside, social hosted on private property with permits underneath, in small print neighborhood friends welcome, HOA drama not included. And on the back, a QR code linking to the county parcel map, showing my property clearly outside the HOA boundary. I slipped them into mailboxes, everyone's, except Karen's. When the day arrived, cars lined both sides of the street. People brought chairs, coolers, food, and curiosity. I'd set up tables, a grill, some music, and my favorite part, a display board featuring printed screenshots from my security cameras. Karen breaking in with a rake. Karen and friends lounging with wine. Karen hosting her Free the Pool protest. Karen spray painting my fence. No captions, no commentary, just pure, unfiltered HOA chaos. Neighbors gathered around the board, gasping, whispering, laughing, shaking their heads. One woman muttered, all this because she couldn't ask permission like a normal person. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was doing it for me. Dean arrived wearing mirrored sunglasses and a grin. He shook hands, served ribs, and sent the subtle message Karen needed to see. I wasn't alone anymore. I sensed her before I saw her. A shift in the crowd, a sudden ripple of tension, whispers. Then there she was, Karen, wearing a sun hat the size of a satellite dish, face pale with disbelief. And beside her, a man in business casual holding a tablet, her new legal representative, most likely a cousin or a co-worker, she convinced to play attorney. She didn't step onto my property. She hovered at the edge like a vampire waiting to be invited in. I approached, slowly, calm, collected. She cleared her throat. Excuse me, is this an HOA-sponsored event? Someone from behind me shouted, Nope, just decent people enjoying private property. The crowd chuckled. Karen did not. She lifted her chin. I demand to speak to whoever's in charge. Dean leaned against the fence, smiling like a man who'd waited his whole life for this moment. Ma'am, if you step 1 foot past this line, you'll be escorted off by the deputy sitting next to the lemonade stand. Karen turned, and, sure enough, a uniformed sheriff's deputy sat under a canopy, sipping sweet tea, chatting with neighbors. Her lawyer whispered, I think we should go. She ignored him. This is harassment, she snapped. I handed her a laminated parcel map. This is reality. She stared at it, then at the photos behind me, then at the neighbors watching her. Her face flushed so red, it matched the spray paint she'd used. You can't just... Wall yourself off from the community, she stammered. Karen, I said softly, I'm not walling myself off from the community. I'm walling myself off from you, the crowd murmured. Her lawyer tugged her arm again. Karen, seriously, let's go. This isn't over, she shouted. Someone from the back yelled. It sure looks like it is. Karen's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw something behind all the anger. Defeat. She spun around and stormed off, the lawyer jogging behind her. The crowd erupted into applause. I just stood there, letting the noise wash over me. Months of chaos, dozens of confrontations, endless pettiness. And finally, I had won, not through shouting, not through fighting, but through patience, planning, and letting Karen expose herself. As the sun dipped low and the final guests headed home, I sat on the porch with Dean beside me. The pool shimmered quietly. The gate stood tall and strong, and the street was peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like the king of my own backyard again. But this story wasn't over yet. Karen still had one last stunt in her. She just didn't know it would be her undoing. The neighborhood pool party had done more than humiliate Karen. It had exposed her, peeled back the layers of her carefully curated persona, until all that remained was entitlement and desperation. For a normal person, that would have been enough. They would have taken the loss, slunk back into their home, and maybe baked some muffins for therapy instead of warfare. But Karen was not normal. Karen didn't accept defeat. She marinated in it, fermented it, and transformed it into something volatile. For nearly 3 weeks after the party, the street fell silent. No flyers, no protests, no kids dragging stools toward my fence, no HOA emails weaponized with glittering threats. Even her patio furniture disappeared from the front yard, making her house look strangely bare, like she was preparing for something or hiding something. At first, the peace felt suspicious, like a predator lying in the tall grass. But then, it began to feel good. Really good. I repaired the last bits of damage on my fence, repainted a few boards, cleaned the pool, bought new chlorine tablets. My dog lounged under the sun without being accused of terrorism. Neighbors waved when they walked by. People stopped to compliment the craftsmanship of Fort Karen proof. Even Roger appeared one afternoon, awkwardly holding 2 beers. Hey, he said, clearing his throat. I just wanted to apologize. The board shouldn't have let things get this far. I clinked my can against his. Appreciate it. He took a long sip, then added quietly, we won't be involving ourselves in anything related to your property going forward, and I'll make sure everyone knows that. I genuinely respected him for that. It was the first time the HOA did something useful in ever. But just when the neighborhood's blood pressure collectively began to drop, just when the trees started sounding like they were breathing easier, just when I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed, she returned. Not loudly, not publicly, not with an audience or a clipboard or a pack of HOA warriors. No. Karen returned like a burglar in a budget spy movie. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I'd planned on finally cleaning the shed, around 4 p.m. My phone buzzed with a single notification, motion detected, backgate camera 3. I assumed it was a bird, or a bug, maybe a neighbor's cat. But when I tapped the live feed, my entire body went cold. There she was, Karen, dressed in black from head to toe, hood up, shoulders hunched, moving like someone attempting stealth without ever having practiced walking quietly. She crouched beside my fence, glancing both ways like a cartoon villain, making sure the coast was clear. Then she pulled something from her pocket. Wire cutters. I blinked at the screen. She took the cutters, reached up, and clipped the zip ties holding the camera mount to the post. The screen jostled violently but stayed connected thanks to the backup bracket I'd installed. Karen didn't know that. She thought she'd blinded me. The camera view tilted upward as she loosened the mount, then the solar panel cable snapped free. She smiled, actually smiled like she'd just defused a nuclear bomb. If she had truly disabled my surveillance, she wouldn't have smiled. She would have cheered. The smile told me something important. Karen was improvising. I switched to camera 4, then camera 5. I watched as she moved down the fence line, clipping wires, disabling the solar charger, adjusting motion sensors. Every move was deliberate, practiced in her mind 1,000 times. Then something even more unbelievable happened. She reached into a backpack and pulled out a towel, a whistle, 3 pairs of children's goggles. My jaw dropped. She waved her hand toward the fence, my Fort Karen-proof fortress, and seconds later, 3 small heads popped up from behind the bushes. Her kids, crawling, dragging inflatable floaties like tiny soldiers crossing enemy lines. She was staging another invasion, I watched in disbelief as she coached them to move quietly using hand signals like she was directing a covert ops mission. One child crawled forward with the exaggerated stealth of a squirrel, thinking itself invisible. Another kept adjusting his goggles like that would help him infiltrate a yard. Karen tested the latch, pried it gently, wedged her sneaker under the corner to lift it just enough for tiny bodies to squeeze through. The kids slipped inside. Karen followed. And within seconds, splash. More splashing. Laughter. Karen's voice drifting through the hedge, smug and soft. There. See, he can't stop us. Those words flipped a switch in me. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel shock. What I felt was clarity. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Yes, I said evenly. This is the homeowner who filed the previous trespass and vandalism reports. The same individuals are back. You'll want to send someone with handcuffs this time. The dispatcher didn't sound surprised. Is it the same woman? Yes. On our way. I hung up and stepped onto my porch. From where I stood, I could hear the splashes. Karen's laugh. One kid blowing water out of his nose. Karen ordering another not to splash her hair. It sounded like a pool scene in a family movie, if the family movie had been written by a deranged villain. I sat down on my porch chair, lifted my glass of tea, and watched the street. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A quiet hum grew louder. 2 patrol cars pulled up. No lights, no sirens, just quiet precision. 2 officers stepped out, moving with the professional calm of people who've dealt with this woman before. They walked through the side yard, through the front gate, and into the backyard, like guests attending the weirdest pool party of their careers. From behind my fence, I heard it. A startled gasp. A splash. Officers. An attempt at charm. An attempt at innocence. A rising panic. I walked around the side and approached through the main gate, tablet in hand. Karen was standing in the shallow-end water, dripping down her black clothes face, contorted into an expression of both outrage and fear. Is there a problem? She asked, voice high, brittle cracking. One officer pointed at her firmly. We need you to step out of the pool area, ma'am. I'm a neighbor, she insisted quickly. This is community access. Not for you, I said, lifting my tablet. The officer nodded. We have footage. She spun toward me, eyes wild. Your cameras weren't working. I checked. I tapped the screen. The footage began playing her, cutting wires, instructing her kids sneaking in. Her face drained of color. One of the officers knelt to help the kids gather their things. Let's get you dried off, okay? His voice was gentle. The children looked confused, embarrassed, scared. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. This is absolutely insane. He's treating us like criminals. The deputy held up the tablet. Ma'am, this is literally video of you committing a crime. It was symbolic, she shouted. I wasn't really going to damage anything. You did damage something, the deputy replied calmly. She rambled, gesticulated wildly, tried to spin the narrative into something noble, something altruistic. She was teaching her kids resilience. She was advocating for community rights. She was exposing hostile architecture. The officers didn't buy a syllable. Finally, they issued her citations for trespass and malicious mischief, warned her that one more incident would result in full criminal charges, and escorted her out through the gate. She didn't argue then. She didn't shout. She just left, silent, defeated, drenched. As she passed me, I raised my glass slightly. Hope the water was worth it. She didn't respond. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the footage again, not because I enjoyed it, but because I needed to understand the depth of Karen's obsession, the way she moved, the way she planned, the way she pulled her children into the madness. It wasn't about swimming. It wasn't even about the HOA anymore. It was about control, about forcing reality to bend to her will, about making her narrative the only narrative even when every piece of evidence contradicted her. But now, the narrative belonged to the cameras, to the law, to the neighborhood watching her unravel. Over the next few days, neighbors stopped by to check in. One brought cookies, another brought a lawn chair, and simply sat with me telling stories about their own HOA nightmares. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost surreal after months of chaos. The street felt lighter, calmer, safer. Then 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's lawn. No goodbye. No announcement, no farewell gathering, just silence and a moving truck. She was leaving. The war was ending. But fate wasn't finished with her yet, and neither was this story. Because Karen, in her final days on the street, still had one last ridiculous spark of chaos to unleash. She just didn't know the neighborhood was already done listening. The for sale sign planted in Karen's front yard felt like the universe finally exhaling after months of holding its breath. A bright red, available banner hung across it, as if the sign itself were shouting, "This nightmare is almost over." And for a few blissful days, the neighborhood glided on the soft hum of relief. People walked their dogs without glancing nervously toward Karen's house. Kids rode their bikes without their parents worrying about being accused of boundary violations. Even the wind seemed to blow softer. But if I had learned anything by then, it was this: Karen never left quietly. She always needed an encore. Her house, normally a shrine to over-decorated seasonal decor, looked barren. No wreath, no inflatable yard ornaments, no chalkboard sign saying "Live, Laugh, Love, HOA." Even her suspiciously new-looking patio set vanished overnight, replaced by a skeletal porch that made the whole house feel unloved. The moving truck arrived early one morning, rumbling down the street like a harbinger of finality. I watched from my porch with my dog curled at my feet, coffee in hand, feeling a satisfaction I can only describe as spiritual cleansing. Watching Karen leave was like watching mold get scrubbed off a shower tile. It wasn't glamorous, but it sure felt necessary. 2 movers began hauling boxes out of her house. Most were sealed neatly. A few were stuffed, bulging at the sides like the packing process had been more of a panic than a plan. I noticed one box marked HOA Personal Files Private and nearly choked on my coffee. I imagined binders labeled Enemies List and unauthorized gnome photos. But here's the thing, Karen herself was nowhere in sight. Not at first. Not until a full hour had passed when the sun rose high enough to cast sharp shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Finally, the front door creaked open, and she appeared dressed in all black again, wearing oversized sunglasses, like she was auditioning for a dramatic farewell scene. She walked down her steps slowly, clutching a decorative sign that read, "Bless this mess." The irony could have flattened me. She placed the sign carefully in her car, then turned to look at her house. Her expression flickered. Anger, regret, embarrassment. It was hard to tell. She was a cocktail of tangled emotions, muddled by denial. She walked across the lawn toward the movers barking orders. "Careful with that. Don't scratch the floor. That box is fragile. Not that one, the other one. No, yes, no, oh my God, do I have to do everything myself?" Somewhere behind me I heard Pam chuckle from her window. A few other neighbors watched too, pretending to sweep porches or trim hedges while subtly sipping in the moment. We earned this show. But Karen didn't go down without one final attempt at rewriting the narrative. Around midday, as I sat on my porch, enjoying a sandwich, Karen approached my driveway. The sound of her heels clacking against the pavement made my shoulders tighten instinctively. She stopped at the edge of my property, back straight, chin raised, performing confidence she didn't possess. "We need to talk," she announced. I set my sandwich down. "Do we?" "Yes." She inhaled deeply. "I want you to know that you pushed me out." I raised an eyebrow. "You vandalized my fence, trespassed multiple times, hosted a protest on my lawn, cut my cameras, broke into my pool, forged notices. Spread lies. Should I continue?" Her face pinched. "You didn't have to escalate things." I leaned back. "I didn't escalate. I defended. There's a difference." Karen crossed her arms. "You've made this street toxic." I laughed softly. "Karen, the street feels calmer than it has in months." She blinked rapidly, as if the statement stung. "People are afraid of you." "No, they were afraid of the chaos you created." She looked toward her house, the movers still working, then back at me. "This neighborhood used to be a community. I tried to bring people together. By annexing my pool, by encouraging unity," I pointed to the laminated parcel map still posted near my gate. "Karen, unity doesn't require trespassing." For a moment her facade cracked. Her shoulders dropped. Her voice softened barely. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." She flinched like I'd struck her. Silence filled the space between us. A breeze rustled through the trees. A car honked in the distance. For a brief moment Karen looked like she might apologize. The tension in her jaw softened. Her eyes shifted downward. But then she straightened. A spark of defiance lit her expression once more. "I hope," she said slowly, "that you're happy. Because you ruined something beautiful." "And what was that?" I asked genuinely. "Community spirit," she declared, gesturing dramatically to the street. I shrugged. "Spirit is strongest when people respect boundaries." Her fists clenched. "My friends agree with me." "Oh, the ones who stopped coming around after the pool party." Her mouth tightened. She spun around and walked away without another word. The movers finished packing shortly afterward. They closed the truck doors with a heavy metallic thud, one that sounded like closure. Karen got into her car, slammed the door, and started the engine. For a moment she stayed there, gripping the steering wheel as if contemplating one final speech. But she didn't. She drove away slowly, turning the corner and disappearing from the neighborhood forever. The silence she left behind was different from the weeks before. This silence was peaceful, earned, settled. The kind that comes after a storm finally exhausts itself. For the next few days, the neighborhood felt almost celebratory. Kids played louder, people chatted at mailboxes, dogs barked freely. I walked my yard without scanning the horizon like a watchtower guard. Neighbors stopped by more often, bringing snacks, stories, and relief. One couple brought homemade cookies saying, "We saw everything. You handled it better than we could have." The guy from down the block dropped off a 6-pack of beer in honor of the Great Wall of No Karen. Someone else slipped a thank you card under my door. It simply read, "Thank you for standing your ground. You saved the neighborhood." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a tired homeowner who survived an HOA apocalypse. But then something odd happened. The new family moved into Karen's old house. A young couple in their mid-30s with a toddler and a golden doodle. They introduced themselves immediately, big smiles, warm handshakes. "We've heard about the pool," they joked. "Don't worry, we don't swim unless invited." I laughed loudly, genuinely. "Then you're already my favorite neighbors." Their toddler waddled over with a plastic toy shaped like a dinosaur. My dog sniffed it gently. There was no tension, no entitlement, just normal, good-hearted, neighborly energy. A stark contrast to the black hole of chaos that once lived next door. A few nights later, I sat on my porch with a glass of tea watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The light hit the pool just right, making the water shimmer like glass. The fence stood tall and secure, the keypad gleaming softly. My dog snored beside me, belly full of treats. Pam had sneaked him. For the first time in a long time, everything felt still. No splashing, no shouting, no glitter gel pen threats, just peace. A sound rustled at the edge of my yard. I glanced over, not with paranoia, but with a calm instinct to check. It was just the wind brushing through the leaves. The sensors didn't trigger, the cameras didn't alert, the fence stood silent, unchallenged. I leaned back in my chair, letting the porch creak under my weight. And it hit me. This wasn't just the end of Karen. This was the return of my home. Not a fortress, not a battleground, just mine. But the funny thing about peace is it lets your mind wander. And as I sat there sipping tea, watching the last rays of sunlight fade, I caught myself thinking, if Karen ever tries anything again, I chuckled, she won't. She can't. The gate is locked. The cameras are running. The neighborhood knows the truth. And I'll always be right here on the porch watching and ready. The peaceful stretch that followed Karen's departure felt almost unreal, like the quiet after a long thunderstorm, when the world is still deciding whether it's finally safe to come out. Birds chirped louder. The breeze smelled fresher. My dog slept so deeply on the porch that he snored in full confidence no one would accuse him of being aggressive again. For the first time in months, life settled into a comfortable routine. But peace has a funny way of revealing the little things you ignored while living in chaos. I started noticing how long it had been since I sat by my pool without checking over my shoulder. How many evenings I spent patrolling my fence instead of relaxing. How many decisions I'd made with adrenaline instead of joy. And as much as I wanted to pretend everything was perfect, now the truth was that part of me hadn't fully unclenched. It wasn't fear, it was vigilance. A residue from months of dealing with someone whose sense of entitlement could have powered a small city. Still, I tried to move on. I spent one weekend repainting the deck chairs, choosing a calm ocean blue shade that made the backyard look like a vacation brochure. I planted new shrubs along the side fence, partly for privacy, partly because digging in the dirt felt like reclaiming the land Karen had tried to annex emotionally. I rebuilt the small fire pit I'd neglected during the drama, stacked the stones, neatly cleaned the grill, replaced the seating cushions. One morning, I even invited the new neighbors over. The husband admired the stonework. The wife complimented the pool tiles. Ironically, the same tiles Karen claimed were community envy. Their toddler splashed her little hands in the small kiddie pool I'd set up, and their golden doodle played with mine in the grass. It was the kind of neighborly afternoon I'd forgotten was possible, but even in all that normalcy, a strange tension hung in the air. Not because of the new neighbors, they were wonderful. It was the house next door, Karen's house. Empty but not quiet. Even before the for sale sign went up, Karen had stopped maintaining the lawn. Grass turned patchy, flowers wilted. The mailbox leaned like it was tired of secrets. After she left, the house didn't improve. Boxes were moved out, but the curtains stayed half open, leaving dark windows staring across the street like the hollow eyes of a scarecrow. The house felt abandoned, even haunted in a petty suburban way. Every time I passed it during my walks, I felt something strange, like a chapter wasn't fully closed. And it wasn't, because Karen left something behind, not physically, but digitally, socially, legally, and, worst of all, publicly. Her Facebook post, the one titled "Discrimination in the Suburbs," was still circulating in a few local groups. Some of her unity through sharing flyers still sat at the entrance of the HOA clubhouse. A few neighbors were still confused about what really happened. Rumors floated, small, harmless, but annoying, like mosquitoes that refuse to die even after the swamp is drained. One rumor said I chased Karen out with military-grade surveillance. Another said I was hostile to families. One wild story claimed I'd installed a moat, yes, a moat around my property. I didn't mind the absurd rumors. They were almost entertaining. But one specific rumor irritated me, the idea that Karen left because the neighborhood wasn't welcoming. People who believed that didn't know the truth. People who believed it could become her future defenders if she ever attempted to stir trouble again, even from afar. And something told me she would. She wasn't done with me. She was done with being seen losing. 2 more weeks passed before the final spark came. One evening, while sitting on the porch watching the sky fade into orange and purple hues, I heard a faint rustling near Karen's house. Not suspicious, just enough to catch my attention. Then a soft thud. Then footsteps. I turned and watched as a small group of people walked up to the now empty house. A realtor I recognized unlocked the door. 2 potential buyers followed, a young woman carrying a clipboard and a man in a baseball cap scanning the property with the pragmatic squint of someone evaluating home inspection costs. I nodded politely at them from my porch. Realtors love to chat with neighbors to get intel on the block, so I wasn't surprised when she waved at me. "Evening," she called. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Sure is," I replied. She stepped closer, smile, professional but friendly. "We're showing this house. Did you know the previous owner?" I paused, because how do you sum up Karen in one sentence? "I knew her," I said carefully. "We had different interpretations of property rights." The realtor laughed politely, but didn't pry. The buyers, however, looked curious. "Is the neighborhood quiet?" the woman asked. "Very," I said truthfully. "Now." They exchanged a glance. Then the man asked, "The seller mentioned something about a disagreement with a neighbor or an HOA issue?" Ah, there it was. I leaned on my porch railing. Well, without going into too much detail, the previous owner had a habit of overstepping boundaries. The realtor gave a tiny warning smile, as if to say, "Don't scare them." I returned a calm smile of my own. "It's a lovely neighborhood," I continued, "as long as you respect property lines and don't try to turn someone else's backyard into a community pool." The woman blinked. The man raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" he asked. I nodded slowly, and the realtor cut in quickly. "Anyway, if you have questions about the HOA, we can go over." "The HOA doesn't govern my property," I said. "This house, yes. Mine, no." It caused confusion for someone who wasn't good with rules. The couple exchanged another look. Then the woman asked quietly, "Was she like that with other neighbors?" Before I could answer, Pam appeared on her own porch, timing impeccable as always. "Like what?" she asked loudly. "Karen-y." The realtor froze. I stifled a grin. Pam walked over, broom in hand like a medieval villager, ready to spill tea. She tried to claim his pool was communal, Pam announced to the buyers. Broke into his yard. Pulled her kids in through the gate. Held a protest. Spray-painted his fence. Lied about her address lines. Tried to get the HOA to annex his property. The realtor's smile collapsed in slow motion. The buyers' faces were priceless. "Oh," the man said. "Oh my God," the woman added. Pam continued enjoying herself far too much. Sheriff came out 3 times. She brought muffins once, but that was a trap. The woman turned to the realtor. "You didn't mention any of this." The realtor stammered. "Well, that's because technically, legally, I sipped my tea like Kermit the Frog." The couple thanked the realtor, thanked me, thanked Pam, and walked off the property with expressions like they'd seen a ghost, one that screamed about bylaws and sunscreen SPF requirements. The realtor lingered a moment, exhaling slowly. "You know," she said carefully, "you could have been less specific." "I believe in transparency," I replied with a shrug. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then shut it. "Fair enough." As she walked away, Pam tapped my arm. "Think they'll buy?" "Nope," I said. "They're gone." "Shame," she replied. "I was hoping for nice neighbors, not terrified ones." But over the next few days, several more potential buyers came and went, and each time someone in the neighborhood, sometimes me, sometimes Pam, sometimes the teenager who once declared Karen unhinged, ended up telling the story. Not maliciously, not as gossip, just truthfully. Karen's house remained on the market. She'd poisoned her own resale value. Day by day, the grass grew taller. The windows gathered dust, the mailbox tilted further, and the house began to look like a visual metaphor for her downfall. One afternoon, Roger, the HOA president, stopped by my porch again, holding a soda this time. You know, he said we had a board meeting about that house. What about it? He shifted. Well, Karen filed a complaint before she left. Of course she did. What kind of complaint she accused you of? Influencing the resale value. I stared at him. Roger, the resale value was destroyed by the person who turned the street into a telenovela. He sighed. I agree. But some board members think you shouldn't be telling buyers things. What should I tell them? That everything was fine. He hesitated. Just be mindful, please. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't right. I wasn't trying to sabotage the sale. I just refused to lie. Karen created the chaos. Karen invited consequences. Karen abandoned the town she tried to colonize. Now she was gone, and her house sat in limbo, unwanted, untrusted, untethered from the pretty picture she'd tried to sell. The next week was uneventful. The house remained empty. The for sale sign began to tilt. The wind knocked over an empty planter. The place looked like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter. One evening, as the sunset bled across the sky, I stood by my fence looking at the house. Its shadow stretched long across the lawn, lonely and quiet. It hit me, then Karen might be gone, but the aftermath of her chaos was still settling. You don't just remove a storm, you rebuild after it. I headed inside, turned off the porch lights, and closed my door. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of anyone watching me. The cameras were still running. The gate was still locked. But my mind was finally still. And somewhere down the road, Karen was starting over. I hoped for her kids' sake that she learned something. But for now, peace lived on my street again, finally. The emptiness of Karen's old house lingered like a shadow over the neighborhood, an echo of drama that everyone could still feel, but no one wanted to mention out loud. For weeks after she left, the street seemed to move in slow motion, rebuilding itself from the chaos she'd created. And for a while, it felt like everything was settling into place. But stories like this don't end neatly, not when someone like Karen was involved. One quiet Saturday morning, I was on my porch sipping coffee, my dog snoring softly beside me when a white sedan pulled up in front of her former house. I didn't think much of it at first, another potential buyer, I assumed. But instead of a realtor stepping out, a man emerged wearing a gray suit and carrying a black briefcase. He walked with purpose eyes, scanning the property. A second man stepped out, then a woman, all dressed professionally, all serious. They approached the front door and let themselves inside with a key. That got my attention. I leaned forward. My neighbor Pam peeked out her window like a groundhog sensing trouble. She whispered loudly, "Who's that?" "No idea," I whispered back. Her window shut again. Seconds later, she reappeared on her porch with a broom pretending to sweep. A classic Pam maneuver. The professionals stayed inside the house for a solid hour. They examined the yard, the fence lines, even the sidewalk chalk marks that children had drawn long after Karen's protests. The woman walked into the backyard and even took pictures of the gate, all without speaking a single word to anyone. Something wasn't right. Finally, they returned to the front lawn. One of the men pointed toward my property, specifically the gate keypad and laminated parcel map still posted proudly. Then all three looked at each other and nodded. The man in the suit approached my driveway. "Good morning," he said crisply. "Are you the homeowner next door?" "Yes," I replied slowly. He extended a business card. County emblem, official seal, Code Enforcement Division. My stomach tightened. "Is there a problem?" "We received a series of complaints from the previous owner prior to her departure," he said calmly. "We're just following up." I blinked. Complaints about what? He flipped open the briefcase. Inside was a folder overflowing with documents, photos, and printed emails. On top was the familiar handwriting I'd recognize anywhere, Karen's looping dramatic cursive. "She filed over 23 complaints," he said, "all within a 2-month period." Of course she did. He handed me the stack. I skimmed the first page. Unsafe fencing practices, unauthorized construction, hostile architecture, barrier intended to exclude community, overuse of surveillance, environmental hazards, illegal water feature, endangering minors, noise disturbance, from intimidation devices, boundary tampering, aggressive, posturing, violation of community spirit guidelines. I laughed so hard I accidentally snorted my coffee. Sir, the woman said firmly, these are serious allegations. They're also fictional, I replied, wiping my mouth. The second man, the quiet one, stepped forward. Did you install all these structures yourself? Yes, I said. Legally, with permits. Would you like to see the paperwork? The three exchanged a glance. The woman nodded. Yes, actually, that would help. I motioned them toward the porch. My dog wagged his tail politely as they approached his contribution to community peacekeeping. I set my coffee on the table, unlocked a small storage cabinet beside the door, and pulled out the meticulously organized binder I'd created precisely because of Karen's antics. Permits, receipts, contractor notes, measurements, copies of county maps, a certificate of compliance, even screenshots of email conversations with zoning officials. I handed the binder over. The three of them flipped through it with growing surprise. The woman's eyebrows lifted. The quiet man nodded. The man in the suit exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his posture. Well, he finally said, closing the binder, this is thorough. Karen made me an expert, I replied dryly. He cleared his throat. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We're required to investigate any formal complaints submitted to us, but it's clear these accusations were exaggerated. Exaggerated is a gentle word, I muttered. We'll be marking the file as resolved. No violations, he said professionally. And we'll be issuing a note on her record concerning misuse of county reporting channels. Pam, who had migrated halfway down her driveway, pretending to inspect a crack in the cement, called out loudly, "Tell them about the spray paint." The woman turned. "Spray paint?" I sighed. "Yes, I have footage." And apparently that was enough. The team asked for a copy of the footage to file their report properly. I handed it over on a USB stick. They thanked me, shook my hand, and returned to Karen's old house for their final inspection. When they left 20 minutes later, the man in the suit gave me a small nod, one of respect, maybe relief, maybe sympathy. The white sedan drove off. For a moment, I stood alone at the edge of my porch binder, still in hand, feeling a bizarre swirl of emotions, vindication, fatigue, and a lingering curiosity. What else had Karen done behind the scenes? I got my answer 3 days later. An envelope arrived in the mail, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I debated throwing it straight into the trash, but curiosity won. I opened it. Inside was a letter, not an apology, not a threat, a justification. A full-page explanation of how she had been misunderstood, persecuted, and forced into defensive action by a man unwilling to share in the spirit of unity. She blamed me for her move, blamed the neighborhood, blamed the HOA, blamed the county, even blamed her kids for not behaving covertly enough. I nearly lost it at that line. But the most interesting part wasn't the letter. It was what came with it. A printed email thread between Karen and a local reporter, the same one who'd written the story titled, "The Pool Isn't Yours, Karen, and Never Was." The reporter had sent her a follow-up message after Karen's move. "Would you like to comment on why you left the neighborhood?" Karen's response was included below, and it was astonishing. She wrote, "I left because I was bullied out by a neighbor who turned the community against me. He fabricated lies, manipulated the HOA, and created hostile barriers aimed at intimidating families. My mission was to promote unity and water safety for children. His mission was to divide us." At the bottom of her message, written in bold, "One day they'll realize I was right." I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so on brand. So perfectly delusionally, Karen. She didn't send the letter to reconcile. She sent it to rewrite history, to leave her version of the story on my doorstep, like a departing monarch, declaring her own legacy. But the truth was this. The neighborhood had already written the final chapter for her, and she wasn't the hero. Later that afternoon, Pam stopped by with a plate of banana bread. "Did you get a letter too?" she asked casually. I blinked. "Two? Oh yeah," she said. "Half the street did." She called me an agent of suburban oppression. I'm framing it. I shook my head, chuckling. "At least she's consistent." "Consistently wrong," Pam corrected. The two of us sat on my porch for a while, enjoying the quiet, real quiet, not the tense kind that feels like the calm before a storm. The sun dipped lower, glinting off the pool surface. My dog snored on the warm boards. A light breeze rustled the leaves. For the first time in months, there was no weight on my chest, no knot in my stomach, no sense of someone plotting behind a fence. The cameras hummed. The gate stood firm. The neighborhood breathed freely. I leaned back in my chair. It was finally over. Not because Karen moved away, not because the sheriff intervened, not because of fences, cameras, or legal documents. It was over because the truth won. The neighborhood unified not through her, but against her chaos. Peace returned, not by force, but by resilience. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the setting sun soak into my skin. My porch, my pool, my home, finally mine again. And somewhere out there, Karen was probably telling a brand new neighborhood that she'd been driven away by community tyrants. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. But that wasn't my story to worry about anymore. My story was right here. Quiet, calm, unbothered. The gate was locked. The line was drawn, and I was still watching from the porch with peace, with clarity, with a lesson carved deep into experience. Boundaries aren't walls. They're self-respect. And when people refuse to honor them, you build a stronger gate. In the end, this story isn't really about a pool or a fence, or even a neighbor named Karen. It's about something all of us eventually face in life, the moment you have to choose between peace and letting someone walk all over you. Setting boundaries doesn't make you mean. Enforcing them doesn't make you the villain. Sometimes, it's the most important act of self-respect you can offer yourself. This experience taught me that you don't have to fight every battle with anger. You can stand your ground calmly. You can protect what's yours without losing who you are. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to let someone rewrite your reality. So, if you're watching this and dealing with your own Karen, a boss, a neighbor, a coworker, even a family member, remember this. Your peace is worth defending. Your boundaries matter. And you are allowed to say no, even when someone insists they deserve a yes. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to defend your boundaries or deal with someone who refused to respect them? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoy these real-life HOA battles, neighborhood dramas, and lessons learned the hard way, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss the next story. Your support helps the channel grow, and trust me, the next saga is just getting started.